Welcome, dear listener. As you prepare to rest, allow yourself to set aside the concerns of the day. Find a comfortable position, breathe deeply, and let the rhythm of your breath guide you into a state of calm. With each exhale, you may imagine yourself drifting further away from the noise of the modern world, and gently stepping into another time, a time long ago, when philosophy, art, and stories first blossomed in ways that would forever change the course of history. Tonight, we will journey back to the world of the ancient Greeks. We will walk softly through their sunlit valleys, rest in the shade of olive groves, listen to the whispers of philosophers in the agora, and witness the rise of ideas so powerful that they continue to shape our world thousands of years later. This will not be a hurried journey. There is no need to rush. Instead, we will move gently one step at a time, like the slow lapping of waves upon the shore of the Aegean Sea. The ancient Greeks themselves loved stories told by firelight, myths shared under starry skies, and ideas passed from teacher to student with patience and care. And tonight, you are part of that same tradition. So allow your body to grow heavy, your mind to grow still, and your heart to open to a calm curiosity as we begin how the ancient Greeks changed the world. The land and the people of Greece. To understand how the Greeks changed the world, we must first understand the world they themselves lived in. Let us drift back more than 2,500 years, to the rugged landscapes of southern Europe, to a land that was not one kingdom, nor one nation, but many small communities scattered across rocky coasts and fertile valleys. The land of Greece is shaped by mountains and sea. High ridges divide the country into regions, creating natural boundaries that encourage independence and diversity among its people. From above, the Greek world looks like a hand stretched into the waters of the Mediterranean, each finger reaching out as a peninsula, surrounded by countless islands. The Aegean Sea sparkles like a sheet of glass beneath the sun, dotted with fishing boats and trading ships. The Ionian Sea, to the west, opens pathways toward Italy. And to the south lies the great expanse of the Mediterranean, carrying ideas, goods, and stories between Greece, Egypt, and the lands of the Near East. Imagine standing on a hillside in ancient Greece. The air is warm, filled with the scent of thyme and rosemary carried by the breeze. Olive trees twist and reach from the rocky soil, their silver-green leaves shimmering in the sunlight. Grapevines climb wooden trellises, their fruit ripening for wine. In the distance, goats and sheep graze upon the slopes, their bells tinkling softly, blending with the song of cicadas. The Greeks lived close to nature. Their lives were shaped by the rhythms of the seasons, planting in spring, harvest in autumn, and celebrating the cycles of life with festivals dedicated to their many gods. Though their land was not rich in great rivers or vast fertile plains like Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Greeks learned to thrive with what they had. They grew olives for oil, grapes for wine, and barley for bread. They built sturdy homes from stone, with courtyards where families gathered to cook, talk, and tell stories. Yet what truly set the Greeks apart was not only their land, but their spirit. Though divided into many small city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and dozens more, the Greeks shared a language, a set of beliefs, and a love of ideas. Each city was independent, proud of its own traditions and ways of life. Sparta, for example, was a land of warriors, where boys trained for battle from a young age. Athens, by contrast, became a center of philosophy, art, and democracy. This variety gave Greece a richness, as if each city were a unique jewel in a crown, shining in its own way. Let us walk now into one of those cities. It is early morning in Athens. The sun is just rising over the Acropolis, casting golden light upon the marble temples that crown the hill. Below, the streets are beginning to stir with life. Merchants arrange their goods in the Agora marketplace. Here you will find clay pots, bright fabrics, baskets of figs, and amphorae of olive oil. You will hear the bleating of goats, the clatter of bronze tools, and the friendly chatter of neighbors greeting one another. A group of children runs through the square, laughing, chasing each other between stalls. An old storyteller sets up a small stool in the corner, ready to recite tales of gods and heroes to anyone who will listen. Nearby, a teacher gathers a few young boys beneath a shaded portico, unrolling a scroll and beginning a lesson on poetry or numbers. The city is alive with learning, trade, and conversation. Life in ancient Greece was not always easy. There were hardships, wars between rival city-states, struggles for land, outbreaks of disease, and the challenges of farming on rocky soil. But the Greeks faced these challenges with resilience. They sought meaning through religion, through storytelling, and through the pursuit of knowledge. For them, the world was not just a place to survive, it was a place to understand. As the day passes, the agora grows busier. Philosophers gather to debate questions: what is justice? What is virtue? How should a city be governed? Citizens come together to vote on matters of law, raising their hands in assembly. Priests prepare offerings at temples, burning incense so that the smoke may carry prayers to the gods above. Sculptors chip away at blocks of marble, shaping statues that will one day stand tall and proud. Fires are lit in the courtyards. Families gather for a simple meal of bread dipped in oil, olives, cheese, perhaps fish if the day was fortunate. They share stories of ancestors, of gods and heroes, of struggles and triumphs. And when the stars appear overhead, they look to the heavens not only with wonder, but with questions: what are the stars, and why do they move as they do? Already, the Greeks are seeking answers that reach beyond survival, answers that touch the mysteries of existence itself. And so, as we close this first chapter, we have walked gently into the land of Greece, a land of mountains and seas, of city-states and citizens, of olive groves and marble temples. It is a world both simple and profound. A world that, though distant in time, feels strangely familiar, for it is the foundation upon which much of our own world still stands. Breathe deeply now. Allow the images of this chapter to settle softly in your mind. The olive trees, the bustling agora, the shimmering sea. We will continue our journey soon, to explore the ideas, the myths, and the discoveries that made the ancient Greeks so extraordinary. But for now, you may simply rest in the gentle knowledge that the story has only just begun. The birth of democracy in Athens. The story of democracy is one of the most remarkable gifts of the ancient Greeks to the world. But to understand how it emerged, let us once again slow down, breathe deeply and step gently into the bustling city of Athens, at a time when new ideas about freedom, equality, and responsibility were just beginning to take root. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing in the heart of the city, centuries ago. The morning sun spills golden light across the marble stones of the Acropolis, while down below, the streets begin to awaken. The city hums softly with the rhythm of daily life. Potters shaping clay, bakers kneading dough, and merchants arranging fresh produce brought in from the countryside. Athens is alive with voices. The air is full of questions, arguments, laughter, and songs. It is a city of contrasted noble marble temples rising high, while narrow alleyways wind through crowded neighborhoods. Everywhere, there is movement, color, and purpose. But beneath this ordinary activity, something extraordinary is unfolding. The Athenians are inventing a new way to live together, a way that is not ruled by the command of one king, nor dictated by the will of a single tyrant, but shaped by the voices of many. This new experiment is called democratia, rule by the people. The gathering place. To see democracy in action, let us walk slowly toward the agora, the central marketplace and gathering space of Athens. Here, beneath shaded colonnades, citizens assemble not only to buy and sell, but to talk, to listen, and to decide the future of their city. The agora is more than a marketplace, it is the living heart of Athenian democracy. Marble statues stand watch over the square. Shrines to the gods remind all present that human choices should be guided by divine justice. Everywhere, groups of men gather in circles, their voices rising and falling as they debate issues of war, trade, and law. The sound is not chaotic, but alive. It is the sound of a city thinking aloud, of ideas being tested in the open air. And slowly, from these gatherings, the principles of democracy take shape. From kings to citizens. In earlier times, Athens was ruled by kings. Later, noble families' aristocrats held power, making decisions for the people without asking their voices. At times, ambitious men seized control as tyrants, ruling harshly but sometimes bringing stability. Yet the Athenians were restless. They were proud, independent, and unwilling to remain silent for long. Step by step, they began to carve out a system where ordinary citizens, not only the rich, not only the powerful, could have a say in how their city was governed. This change did not happen overnight. It grew slowly, like the steady growth of an olive tree. The roots of democracy sank deep, watered by struggle and debate, until at last they bore fruit. Solon the lawgiver. One of the first great steps came with Solon, a wise statesman and poet, chosen to lead Athens in the early 6th century before our time. The city was in turmoil. Many poor farmers had fallen into debt and were forced into slavery by the wealthy. Anger filled the streets, and Athens stood on the edge of collapse. Solon stepped forward with new laws. He cancelled debts that had crushed the poor. He forbade the practice of enslaving citizens because of money owed. He reorganized society into classes not by birth alone, but by wealth, allowing more citizens to take part in government. Though his reforms did not solve every problem, they opened a door. They reminded the Athenians that power could shift, that justice could be pursued through laws, and that the voices of the people mattered. Cleisthenes and the birth of democratia. Not long after, another leader emerged, Cleisthenes, often called the father of Athenian democracy. It was he who gave shape to the system that would make Athens famous. Cleisthenes broke apart the old power of noble families. Instead, he divided citizens into new groups based not on bloodline, but on where they lived. This change forced people from different regions, farmers, traders, craftsmen, to work together in new communities. He created the Council of 500, chosen by lot, so that ordinary citizens could help prepare laws for the assembly. He gave the people themselves, the ecclesia, the final power to vote on decisions. And he introduced a practice called ostracism, where citizens could vote to banish for 10 years any man considered dangerous to the city's freedom. For the first time in history, the people of Athens had built a government where power truly rested, at least in principle, with the citizens themselves. A day in the assembly. Let us walk, slowly and quietly, into a gathering of the Athenian assembly. It is early morning, and citizens are streaming toward the Nix, a hill that overlooks the city. The sun is rising over the horizon, casting long shadows as men climb the stone steps to take their places. The air is alive with anticipation. Some wear simple tunics of wool, others finer cloaks dyed in bright colors, but here, in the assembly, wealth and status matter less. All citizens may speak. All citizens may vote. The herald calls for order, and the meeting begins. One man steps forward to propose a new law. He speaks loudly, his words echoing across the open air. Another rises to oppose him, offering a different vision. Voices rise, hands wave, the people murmur their approval or discontent. At last, the moment of decision comes. The citizens raise their hands, voting not as subjects of a ruler, but as rulers themselves. The choice is made. The city has spoken. This is democracy, not perfect, not equal for all, but revolutionary nonetheless. Who could participate? It is important to remember that Athenian democracy, though extraordinary, was not open to everyone. Only free male citizens could vote. Women, enslaved people, and foreigners were excluded from political life. Yet within its limits, this system was unlike anything the world had seen before. For the first time, ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, shopkeepers, could help shape the destiny of their city. They debated laws, decided on war and peace, and even judged trials in large juries drawn by lot. Power was no longer confined to kings or nobles, it was shared, at least among the citizen body. The spirit of debate. The Athenians valued speech as much as action. In their eyes, to persuade with words was as noble as to fight with swords. Young men studied rhetoric, the art of speaking well, so they might one day stand in the assembly and sway their fellow citizens. Public debate was not always calm or polite. Arguments could be fierce, emotions strong, decisions heavy with consequence. But through this clamor, a deeper truth shone, the belief that the city belonged to its people, and that the people must govern themselves. Festivals of freedom. Democracy was not only about laws and votes. It was celebrated in festivals, woven into the very culture of Athens. During the great festival of Dionysus, plays were performed in the theater, many of them exploring questions of justice, power, and morality. Comedy and tragedy alike gave citizens a chance to reflect on their society, to laugh at its flaws, and to weep at its struggles. Even the Olympic Games, though older than democracy itself, the legacy of Athenian democracy. As centuries passed, Athens would face challenges, wars with Sparta, invasions by Persia, and the eventual rise of Macedon and Rome. But the idea of democracy, once born, could not be silenced. Though imperfect and incomplete, it planted a seed that would grow far beyond Greece. It would inspire philosophers, revolutionaries, and citizens across the world. It would echo in the halls of Rome, reawaken in the Renaissance, and resound in the modern age. The Athenians may never have imagined how far their experiment would reach, yet their voices still speak to us today, reminding us that freedom is fragile, that participation is a duty, and that the rule of the people is both a privilege and a responsibility. And so, as we leave the assembly of Athens, let us pause for a gentle breath. Feel the warmth of the sun on your face, hear the distant call of vendors in the marketplace, and sense the pride of citizens who, long ago, believed that their voices could shape the future. The birth of democracy was not a single moment, but a long unfolding, a journey of struggle, compromise, and hope. And though the world has changed greatly since then, the spirit of that journey lives on. Rest now in this thought. Let the calm weight of history settle around you, like a soft blanket. We have walked with Solon, with Cleisthenes, with the citizens of Athens as they raised their hands to decide the fate of their city. And when you are ready, we will continue onward into the world of philosophy, where the voices of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle will whisper timeless questions into the night. The Warring States and the Birth of Philosophy. The story of ancient Greece is not only one of beauty, of olive groves and marble temples. It is also a story of conflict. For the city-states of Greece, proud and independent, often turned their strength against one another. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes each sought its own glory, its own security, and its own vision of how life should be lived. And yet, from the very fires of conflict, another force emerged, one quieter, more enduring than war. It was the force of philosophy, the love of wisdom, the pursuit of truth, the gentle but powerful asking of questions that has echoed through the centuries. Let us walk together now, slowly, gently, through this era of both strife and wonder, through wars that shook the Greek world, and through voices of wisdom that gave it hope. The tension between cities. It is morning in the Greek world, sometime in the 5th century before our time. The sun rises over rugged hills, touching the rooftops of many proud city-states. Each city is small, but each believes itself to be the center of the Greek spirit. Sparta, to the south, trains its youth from childhood to be warriors. Discipline, silence, obedience, these are the virtues of Sparta. Its men march in ranks, shields gleaming, spears pointed, every soldier a piece of the greater whole. Athens, by contrast, revels in talk, in art, in argument. Here the citizens vote in assembly, build theaters for plays, and paint pottery with scenes of gods and heroes. Here the idea of freedom flourishes, but also the ambition of empire. Other cities, Thebes, Corinth, Argos, Delphi, each carry their own traditions, their own jealousies, their own pride. The land of Greece is a patchwork quilt, stitched together by sea lanes and rivalries, bound by a shared language but divided by fierce independence. And so, war is never far away. The Persian threat. Before the Greek cities fought one another, they faced an even greater danger, the mighty Persian Empire. Vast, wealthy, and powerful, Persia stretched from the valleys of Mesopotamia to the deserts of Egypt and beyond. To the Persians, the scattered cities of Greece must have seemed like small stones lying on the edge of their empire, easy to sweep aside. But when Persia came, the Greeks resisted. At Marathon, Athenian soldiers, farmers and craftsmen turned warriors charged across the plain and drove back the invaders. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans and their allies stood in a narrow pass, holding off a vast army until the last man fell. At Salamis, Athenian ships, swift and cunning, destroyed the great Persian fleet upon the waves. These victories bound the Greeks together, for a time, in a common cause. They believed the gods had favored them, and that freedom was worth defending against the mightiest empire on earth. And yet, once the Persian threat faded, old rivalries returned. The unity of Greece began to fracture once more. The Peloponnesian War. Athens had grown powerful after the Persian Wars. Its navy ruled the Aegean, its allies paid tribute, and its citizens grew wealthy from trade. The city shone with marble temples, theaters, and art. But its power troubled others, especially Sparta, whose strength lay in its army and its strict way of life. Soon, mistrust turned into open conflict. The Peloponnesian War, as it came to be called, set Athens against Sparta in a struggle that lasted nearly 30 years. Imagine the toll of such a war. Armies marching across fields, burning crops. Ships clashing upon the sea. Cities besieged, walls battered, families separated. The proud temples of Greece echoed not with prayers, but with cries of fear. Athens, despite its brilliance, suffered greatly. Plague struck the city, carrying away thousands of lives. Allies deserted. Defeats piled upon defeats. And in the end, Athens surrendered. Sparta, stern and victorious, stood as master of Greece for a time. Yet even Sparta could not hold the prize for long. From struggle to thought. And yet, even as armies clashed, another battle was taking place, a quieter battle, fought not with swords, but with words. For during these centuries of strife, the Greeks also turned inward, asking questions about justice, about truth, about the very meaning of life. Philosophy was born. In the marketplace, on shaded porches, in gardens and academies, teachers and students gathered. They spoke not of conquest, but of wisdom. They debated the nature of the soul, the structure of the universe, the duties of a citizen, the meaning of virtue. And while the wars would eventually fade into silence, these questions would never die. Socrates, the gadfly of Athens. Among these voices, one stands apart from Socrates, the strange, stubborn, endlessly curious man who wandered the streets of Athens asking questions. Socrates was unlike the poets, who spun tales of gods and heroes. He was unlike the sophists, who taught the art of persuasion for a fee. He claimed to know nothing, and yet he asked everything. Approach him now, in your mind's eye, as he stands barefoot in the marketplace. His cloak is simple, his beard untrimmed, his gaze piercing but kind. He stops a young man and asks, "What is justice?" The youth offers an answer. Socrates shakes his head gently, and asks another question. The conversation spirals deeper and deeper, until the young man realizes that he does not truly know what he thought he knew. This was the method of Socrates to reveal ignorance, to push others toward truth not by giving answers, but by asking better questions. He believed that the unexamined life was not worth living, and that true wisdom came from recognizing one's own limitations. Many loved him for his honesty. Many more grew weary of his challenges. And in time, the city of Athens, bruised by war and fearful of dissent, condemned him to death. Even as he drank the cup of poison hemlock, Socrates remained calm, speaking gently to his friends about the immortality of the soul. His body perished, but his voice lived on, echoing in the minds of his students, and through them, across the ages. Plato, the dreamer of ideas. Among those students was Plato, who would carry Socrates' teachings into a new realm of thought. Plato founded the Academy, a place of learning that welcomed seekers of wisdom for centuries. In his writings, Plato imagined a world beyond the one we see, a realm of perfect forms, unchanging truths of which our world is only a shadow. He wrote dialogues in which Socrates still lived, questioning, debating, leading others toward deeper understanding. Plato dreamed of an ideal state, ruled not by wealth or power, but by philosopher kings, leaders guided by wisdom rather than ambition. Though such a state has never truly existed, the vision itself has shaped countless thinkers since. To read Plato is to feel the pull of something eternal, an invitation to look beyond appearances, to seek what is lasting. Aristotle, the master of many things. Yet another voice rose from Plato's Academy: Aristotle, a man whose mind reached into nearly every corner of knowledge. Where Plato sought eternal forms, Aristotle studied the world as it is. He observed plants and animals, classified them, and sought patterns in nature. He studied politics, poetry, logic, and ethics. He believed that by careful observation and reason, humans could understand the laws that governed the universe. Aristotle taught that the purpose of life was to seek eudaimonia, a flourishing, balanced life, guided by virtue and reason. He emphasized the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies between extremes, courage between recklessness and cowardice, generosity between wastefulness and greed. His influence was vast. He tutored Alexander the Great, who would carry Greek culture across the known world. His writings shaped medieval scholars, Islamic philosophers, and Renaissance thinkers alike. Even today, his logic underpins much of our science and philosophy. A legacy of thought. The wars of Greece weakened its cities, left scars upon its people. But philosophy endured. The voices of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle rose above the clash of arms, offering questions and insights that would guide humanity for millennia. Other schools too would flourish: the Stoics, who taught endurance and calm in the face of suffering. The Epicureans, who sought happiness through simple pleasures and friendship. The Cynics, who rejected wealth and status, choosing lives of simplicity. Each voice, each path, added to the chorus of Greek wisdom, weaving a tapestry of thought that stretched far beyond the borders of Greece. Closing the chapter. And so, as we close this chapter of our journey, let us pause once more. The clash of swords has faded, the cries of battle are gone. What remains is the quiet murmur of a philosopher in the marketplace, a teacher in the academy, a thinker observing the stars. The Greek city-states may have warred with one another, but in their search for wisdom, they gave the world something greater than empire. They gave us the courage to ask questions, and the patience to seek answers. Rest with this thought. Breathe slowly. Let the names of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle drift softly through your mind, like distant stars shining above the night. The wars may have ended long ago, but the wisdom they inspired still lights our path. The first emperor and the Chian unification. Far away from the mountains and seas of Greece, across deserts, rivers, and vast plains, another story was unfolding. It was a story of ancient China, where long-divided kingdoms came together under one ruler who history remembers as the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Just as the Greeks shaped the world through ideas, the Chinese would shape it through unity, law, and the creation of an empire that has echoed across millennia. Let us walk slowly now, across time and space, into the valleys of the Yellow River, into the age of the warring states, and into the moment when one man's vision would change the destiny of China forever. The warring states. For centuries, before the unification of China, the land was divided into many states. These were the final centuries of the Zhou dynasty, but by this time, the Zhou kings held little real power. Instead, lords and nobles ruled their own territories, each seeking to expand, each struggling for survival. It was an age of war. From the northern steppes, horsemen raided across the borders. In the south, rice fields stretched wide, while ambitious rulers schemed for dominance. Armies marched endlessly, clashing in fields of wheat and barley. Castles rose, walls expanded, and iron weapons replaced bronze. Historians call this time the Warring States period, a name that captures both the violence and the restless energy of an age when rival kingdoms fought for supremacy. 7 great states emerged as the most powerful: Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and Qin. Among them, the state of Qin, once dismissed as backward and distant in the western lands, slowly grew stronger. Its people were hardened by frontier life. Its leaders valued discipline and order. And under the guidance of strict laws and efficient reforms, Qin prepared itself not only to survive, but to conquer. The rise of Qin. Imagine the rugged lands of Qin, far to the west of the Central Plains. The soil is rougher here, the climate harsher, the mountains tall and forbidding. And yet, this harshness bred strength. The farmers of Qin learned resilience. The soldiers of Qin marched with determination. Rulers such as Duke Xiao and his minister Xiangyang transformed Qin through a philosophy we now call legalism. Unlike the gentle teachings of Confucius, which emphasized morality and family, legalism taught that order came only through strict laws, firm punishments, and strong authority. Xiangyang's reforms were harsh, but they made Qin efficient. Land was redistributed to farmers, who now owed loyalty directly to the state rather than to nobles. Military service was rewarded with land and status. The army grew disciplined, organized, and unstoppable. By the 3rd century before our time, Qin had become the strongest of the warring states. And its young king, Yingzheng, prepared to finish what generations before him had begun: the unification of all under heaven. Yingzheng, the first emperor. Yingzheng ascended the throne of Qin as a boy, but he proved to be fierce, determined, and unyielding. Through years of campaigns, he sent his armies against rival states. One by one, the great kingdoms fell. Han was the first to be conquered, then Zhao with its strong warriors, then the mighty state of Chu with its vast lands. Wei and Yan followed, their cities captured. By the year 221 BCE, Yingzheng stood as master of all China. No longer was he merely the king of Qin. He declared himself Shi Huangdi, the first emperor. The dream of unity. The first emperor's vision was bold and sweeping. For centuries, China had been divided into its people speaking different dialects, using different weights and measures, following different laws. Now, Qin Shi Huang sought to bind them into one. He standardized the written script, so that people across the empire could read and communicate in the same characters. He unified weights and measures, ensuring that trade was fair from one region to another. He built roads stretching thousands of miles, linking distant provinces to the capital. And he began the construction of mighty walls to guard the northern frontier, the earliest form of what would one day become the Great Wall of China. For the people of China, life changed profoundly. A farmer in the south could now measure grain with the same system as a merchant in the north. A soldier from the west could march on the same roads as a trader from the east. The empire was vast, yet for the first time, it was woven together under one rule, one law, one emperor. The harshness of rule. Yet unity came at a price. The emperor ruled with the same strictness that had strengthened Qin. The laws were harsh. Punishments are severe. Those who opposed him were silenced. It is said that he ordered the burning of many books that contradicted legalist thought, seeking to erase ideas that might challenge his authority. Some scholars who resisted were punished, buried alive as a warning to others. The empire, though unified, rested on fear as much as order. The people admired the emperor's achievements, yet they also whispered of his cruelty. And still, his power seemed absolute. The great projects. The first emperor's ambition extended beyond laws and roads. He dreamed of monuments that would last for eternity. The Great Wall, though only in its early stages, stretched like a dragon across the northern hills, a barrier against nomadic raiders. In the capital, palaces and halls rose in splendor, symbols of imperial might. But his greatest project was one he prepared for himself in his tomb. Beneath the earth at Mount Li, a vast underground palace was constructed, guarded by thousands of life-sized soldiers made of clay. These terracotta warriors, each with unique features, stood ready to protect their emperor in the afterlife. Even today, more than 2,000 years later, their silent watch continues, a reminder of the first emperor's vision of eternal rule. The search for immortality. Despite his power, Qin Shi Huang feared death. He longed to live forever, to rule without end. He sent ships in search of islands where immortals were said to dwell. He commanded alchemists to prepare elixirs of life. Ironically, these potions, laced with mercury, may have hastened his death. In the year 210 BCE, while traveling on a grand tour of his empire, the first emperor fell ill and passed away. His death was sudden, and though his achievements were vast, his dynasty would not last long. Rebellions soon erupted, and within a few years, the Qin dynasty fell. The legacy of Qin. And yet, though short-lived, the unification of China under Qin Shi Huang left a mark that never faded. The very word, China, comes from Qin. The systems he standardized writing, measures, and roads endured for centuries. And his vision of a unified empire became the model for every dynasty that followed. The Han, who replaced the Qin, softened the harshness of legalism with Confucian ideals, but they kept the structure the first emperor had built. For 2,000 years, emperors would rule China as a single empire, tracing their legacy back to Qin Shi Huang. And so, as we close this chapter of our journey, let us reflect gently on the life of the first emperor. A man of vision and ambition, stern and unyielding, feared and admired. He forged unity out of division, law out of chaos, empire out of fragments. Imagine, if you will, the silent ranks of terracotta soldiers standing in the darkness of his tomb. Each one unique, each one waiting, each one a reflection of an emperor's dream of eternity. Breathe slowly, let the image settle into your mind. For though the man himself has long turned to dust, his empire's legacy endures, like a stone foundation beneath the vast house of history. Rest with this thought. The wars of Greece gave us philosophy. The wars of China gave us unity. And both, in their own way, changed the world. The Golden Age of Athens. The wars that had once torn Greece apart slowly gave way to a new dawn. And in this dawn, one city, bright and brilliant, rose to shine above all the rest. That city was Athens. The Golden Age of Athens was not merely a time of wealth or victory. It was a flowering of art, philosophy, politics, and culture so radiant that even now, more than 2,000 years later, its light still reaches us. Close your eyes, and imagine the city. White marble temples catch the glow of the sun. Markets buzz with voices of traders, citizens, and visitors from distant lands. Philosophers stroll shaded walkways, debating the nature of life. Artists carve statues so lifelike, they seem ready to breathe. And above all, the Parthenon rises proudly, crown of the Acropolis, symbol of Athenian pride. This was Athens at its height, the 5th century before our time. And this was the world of the Golden Age. From war to peace. The Golden Age emerged from the struggles of war. Only decades before, Athens had stood against the mighty Persian Empire. The battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Its purpose was to protect Greece from future threats, but in practice, it became the foundation of Athenian power. Ships from allied states carried tribute grain, silver, and gold to Athens. And with this wealth, Athens built not only its defenses, but also its temples, theaters, and monuments. The age of empire had begun. The vision of Pericles. No name is more closely tied to this age than Pericles, the great statesman of Athens. Pericles believed in democracy, in the power of citizens to shape their own destiny. He expanded the rights of the assembly, giving more men a voice in the affairs of the city. And he also believed that Athens should be the shining example of Greek greatness. Under his leadership, the city undertook a magnificent building program. The Acropolis, once ruined by war, was crowned with new temples. The Parthenon rose as a tribute to Athena, goddess of wisdom, protector of the city. Sculptors and architects designed works that blended strength and beauty in perfect harmony. Pericles also nurtured culture. He encouraged playwrights to bring their dramas to life in the theater of Dionysus. He supported philosophers, artists, and teachers. Athens became not only a city of power, but also of ideas. The heart of democracy. Imagine yourself walking through the agora, the marketplace and heart of Athenian life. Here, citizens gathered not only to buy and sell, but to discuss politics, to listen to speeches, to debate laws. Athenian democracy was direct. Citizens met in the assembly, raising their hands to vote on matters of war, peace, and policy. Officials were chosen by lot, so that no man could claim power by birth or wealth alone. Juries of ordinary citizens decided legal cases, sometimes with hundreds of men serving together. Of course, this democracy was limited. Only free men who were citizens could vote, women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. Yet, even with its flaws, it was a bold experiment, unlike anything the world had seen before. The Athenians believed that the voice of the people was the foundation of freedom. And though centuries have passed, the echo of their assembly still lingers in the very idea of democracy today. The theater of dreams. As the sun lowered in the sky, Athenians made their way to the great theater carved into the hillside. Here, thousands of people gathered to watch the plays of the age. Tragedians such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides brought stories of gods and heroes to life, stories that explored the deepest questions of fate, justice, and human suffering. Comedians like Aristophanes filled the stage with wit and satire, poking fun at politicians and society. For the Athenians, theater was not mere entertainment. It was a civic duty, a shared experience that bound the community together. Through drama, they explored what it meant to be human, what it meant to live, to suffer, to hope. The philosophers. By day, in the shaded courtyards and stoa, philosophers engaged in endless dialogue. Socrates, with his searching questions, challenged young men to examine their lives. He wandered the streets barefoot, asking simple yet profound questions. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the truth? His student, Plato, carried forward these teachings, founding the academy, a place where ideas could be nurtured for generations. Plato envisioned a world of ideal forms, a reality beyond the senses, a higher truth. And then came Aristotle, student of Plato, but thinker in his own right. Where Plato sought ideals, Aristotle studied the world as it was. He observed, categorized, and analyzed everything from politics to biology, from logic to poetry. Together, these thinkers laid the foundations of philosophy, science, and ethics, shaping not only their own age, but centuries of thought to come. The splendor of art and sculpture. The artists of Athens pursued beauty with devotion. Sculptors like Phidias carved statues of gods and heroes, their marble forms balanced between strength and grace. Painters decorated pottery with scenes of myth and daily life. Even common objects were adorned with artistry. The Parthenon itself stood as the pinnacle of Athenian art. Its columns rose with perfect proportion. Inside, a massive statue of Athena, gleaming with gold and ivory, watched over the city. Every detail reflected the Athenian belief in harmony, order, and balance. This pursuit of beauty was more than decoration. It was a reflection of the Athenian soul, a belief that human beings, through art and reason, could capture something of the divine. Life in the city. Beyond temples and theaters, Athens was a living, breathing city. In the narrow streets, children played while women tended to the household. Farmers brought goods from the countryside, filling the markets with olives, figs, and wine. Ships arrived at the bustling port of Piraeus, carrying grain from Egypt, timber from Macedonia, and silver from mines in Thrace. Athens thrived on trade, its ships sailing across the Aegean, linking the city with distant lands. It was a cosmopolitan place, alive with voices from across the Mediterranean. Yet, daily life was also humble. Homes were simple, built of mud, brick and stone. Meals consisted of bread, cheese, olives, and wine. Religion, woven into every aspect of life, filled the calendar with festivals and rituals. Athenians honored their gods with processions, sacrifices, and feasts. The great Panathenaic festival, dedicated to Athena, filled the streets with music, dancing, and athletic games. Shadows of conflict. But even in this golden age, the Peloponnesian War, a long and bitter struggle between Athens and Sparta, would eventually bring the golden age to an end. The brilliance of Athens dimmed as plague, defeat, and political turmoil took their toll. And yet, even as Athens declined, its legacy remained. The ideas born in this city, democracy, philosophy, art, and reason would outlive the war, carried forward by generations to come. The legacy of the Golden Age. The Golden Age of Athens was brief, a single shining century. But in that time, humanity reached heights of creativity and thought unmatched in history. Democracy, though flawed, gave voice to the people. Philosophy opened the mind to endless questions. Art and architecture reached perfection in balance and form. Drama explored the deepest truths of the human spirit. From the Parthenon to the dialogues of Plato, from the laws of the assembly to the tragedies of Sophocles, the gifts of Athens continue to shape our world. As you imagine the marble temples glowing in the soft light of dawn, or the voices of philosophers drifting across the agora, let yourself rest in the thought that once, long ago, a city dared to dream of beauty, wisdom, and freedom, and in doing so, left a legacy that endures forever. Breathe gently, as the city of Athens fades from your mind's eye. The sound of the marketplace grows quiet, the flicker of oil lamps dims, the marble temples fall into silence beneath the stars. The golden age has ended, yet its light continues, like the soft glow of the moon upon the sea. Rest now, knowing that even in the vastness of history, moments of brilliance shine through the ages, guiding us, inspiring us, reminding us of the greatness that human beings can achieve. Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic world. The golden age of Athens had passed. Wars between the Greek city-states had left the land divided and weakened. For decades, Sparta, Thebes, and Athens struggled for dominance, each rising, each falling, until none could truly claim lasting power. And into this fractured world, from the rugged north, came a kingdom that few had taken seriously before. A kingdom not of marble temples and philosophers, but of strong warriors and ambitious kings. This was Macedonia. It was from this land that a young man would rise, a man whose name would echo through eternity. He would ride faster, march farther, and conquer more lands than any before him. His name was Alexander. History remembers him as Alexander the Great. The rise of Macedonia. Before Alexander, there was his father, King Philip II of Macedon. Philip was a master strategist, a man who understood that while the southern city-states were consumed with rivalries, Macedonia could grow strong in their shadow. He reformed the Macedonian army, training soldiers to fight in tight formations, long spears called sarissas extending before them like a forest of iron. He built alliances, but also subdued rivals, steadily uniting Greece under his leadership. Philip dreamed of leading a grand campaign against Persia, the great empire that had once threatened Greece. But before he could fulfill his vision, he was struck down and assassinated at a festival in 336 BCE. The throne passed to his son, only 20 years old. A youth, untested, suddenly made king. This was Alexander. The education of a prince. From an early age, Alexander had been prepared for greatness. His mother, Olympias, instilled in him a fierce pride and belief in destiny. And his father ensured he was trained in the arts of war. But his most famous teacher was none other than Aristotle, the great philosopher. In a quiet garden near Mysa, Alexander and other young nobles studied under him. They learned philosophy, ethics, politics, and science. They read Homer's epics, the tales of heroes and gods, stories that stirred Alexander's imagination. It is said that Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad with him throughout his campaigns, sleeping with it beneath his pillow, as though the words of Achilles, the great warrior, were guiding him. The young king. When Philip was killed, many expected Alexander's rule to be short-lived. The Greek city-states rebelled, thinking a boy could not hold power. But Alexander acted swiftly. He marched his army south, his presence enough to quell dissent. When Thebes resisted, Alexander destroyed the city as a warning. Athens, fearful, submitted. In a single stroke, the young king secured his authority. Now, the stage was set. With Greece united under his command, Alexander turned to his father's dream. The conquest of Persia. The campaign begins. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with an army of about 40,000 men. On the far shore lay Asia, and with it, the vast Persian Empire. At the river Granicus, he met the first Persian forces. Charging boldly into the river, Alexander led his men to victory, nearly losing his life but inspiring his soldiers with fearless courage. From there, he moved along the coast, liberating Greek cities from Persian control. At Issus, in 333 BCE, he faced the Persian king himself Darius III. Though outnumbered, Alexander's tactics and the discipline of his army won the day. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, who fell into Alexander's hands. Alexander treated them with honor, a gesture that displayed both his magnanimity and his sense of destiny. The march south. Instead of pursuing Darius immediately, Alexander turned south. He besieged the city of Tyre, which resisted fiercely. For months, the city held out, but Alexander's determination was unshakable. He built alliances, but also subdued rivals, steadily uniting Greece under his leadership. Philip dreamed of leading a grand campaign against Persia, the great empire that had once threatened Greece. But before he could fulfill his vision, he was struck down and assassinated at a festival in 336 BCE. The throne passed to his son, only 20 years old. A youth, untested, suddenly made king. This was Alexander. The education of a prince. From an early age, Alexander had been prepared for greatness. His mother, Olympias, instilled in him a fierce pride and belief in destiny. And his father ensured he was trained in the arts of war. But his most famous teacher was none other than Aristotle, the great philosopher. In a quiet garden near Mysa, Alexander and other young nobles studied under him. They learned philosophy, ethics, politics, and science. They read Homer's epics, the tales of heroes and gods, stories that stirred Alexander's imagination. It is said that Alexander kept a copy of Homer's Iliad with him throughout his campaigns, sleeping with it beneath his pillow, as though the words of Achilles, the great warrior, were guiding him. The young king. When Philip was killed, many expected Alexander's rule to be short-lived. The Greek city-states rebelled, thinking a boy could not hold power. But Alexander acted swiftly. He marched his army south, his presence enough to quell dissent. When Thebes resisted, Alexander destroyed the city as a warning. Athens, fearful, submitted. In a single stroke, the young king secured his authority. Now, the stage was set. With Greece united under his command, Alexander turned to his father's dream. The conquest of Persia. The campaign begins. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont with an army of about 40,000 men. On the far shore lay Asia, and with it, the vast Persian Empire. At the river Granicus, he met the first Persian forces. Charging boldly into the river, Alexander led his men to victory, nearly losing his life but inspiring his soldiers with fearless courage. From there, he moved along the coast, liberating Greek cities from Persian control. At Issus, in 333 BCE, he faced the Persian king himself Darius III. Though outnumbered, Alexander's tactics and the discipline of his army won the day. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, who fell into Alexander's hands. Alexander treated them with honor, a gesture that displayed both his magnanimity and his sense of destiny. The march south. Instead of pursuing Darius immediately, Alexander turned south. He besieged the city of Tyre, which resisted fiercely. For months, the city held out, but Alexander's determination was unshakable. He built a causeway across the sea, bringing his army to the walls. At last, Tyre fell. From there, he moved into Egypt. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a liberator. Though united no longer, the world Alexander had reshaped would never return to what it had been. The Hellenistic world. The centuries after Alexander's death are called the Hellenistic Age. Greek culture, language, and ideas spread across the vast territories he had conquered. In Egypt, the city of Alexandria rose as a beacon of learning, its library said to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls. In Asia, Greek art and architecture blended with local traditions, creating new styles. Philosophy flourished, with schools such as Stoicism and Epicureanism offering guidance in uncertain times. The Hellenistic world was one of exchange and fusion. Greek became the language of commerce and scholarship from the Mediterranean to India. Science, mathematics, and medicine advanced. It was a world shaped by the vision of Alexander, even after his death. The legacy of Alexander. Alexander's empire may have crumbled, but his legacy endured. He had shown what was possible when ambition was boundless, when courage and vision carried men to the ends of the earth. He spread Greek culture far beyond its homeland, creating a foundation upon which Rome, and later civilizations, would build. He inspired legends, stories of a conqueror touched by the divine. And though he lived only a short life, he lived it so fully, so fiercely, that more than 2,000 years later, the world still remembers his name. Closing reflection. Let your breath slow now, as you imagine the figure of Alexander fading into history. The sound of horses' hooves, the clash of battle, the march of armies all grow quiet. What remains is the dream of unity, the vision of a world connected by shared ideas, shared culture, shared humanity. Alexander the Great passed away in Babylon, but his shadow stretched across continents, across centuries. And in the stillness of night, his story, like so many others of the ancient world, drifts gently into your dreams. The rise of Rome and the influence of Greece. The Hellenistic world stretched wide after the death of Alexander. Greek culture had touched lands as distant as India, Egypt, and Central Asia. Yet while the East absorbed and transformed Greek traditions, far to the west, in a rugged land of hills and fertile plains, another power was slowly stirring. This was Italy, and within it lay a city that would one day rise higher than them all. Its name was Rome. A city by the Tiber. Long before marble temples and mighty legions, Rome was but a small settlement along the banks of the Tiber River. According to legend, it was founded in 753 BCE by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars, the god of war, who were abandoned as infants and suckled by a she-wolf. The story goes that the brothers quarreled over where to build their city, and Romulus struck down Remus in anger. Thus Rome was born, in both myth and blood. But history tells a different tale. Rome began as one of many Latin villages in central Italy, shaped by its neighbors the Etruscans to the north, skilled in engineering and religion, and the Greeks to the south, whose colonies along the coast brought art, philosophy, and trade. From these influences, Rome absorbed much, the arch from the Etruscans, the alphabet from the Greeks, and a sense of destiny that was uniquely its own. The Republic rises. In its earliest days, Rome was ruled by kings. But in 509 BCE, according to tradition, the Romans overthrew their monarch, vowing never again to bow to a single ruler. In its place, they created the Roman Republic, a system that balanced power between elected officials, a senate of elders, and assemblies of citizens. This republic, with its checks and balances, was unlike anything the world had yet seen. The Romans valued duty, discipline, and loyalty above all else. A Roman was taught to place the good of the state above personal ambition. The word they used was virtus, a quality of strength, courage, and civic responsibility. Conquest of Italy. The Republic was not content to remain a city. Step by step, Rome extended its influence across Italy. At first, it fought its neighbors the Latins, the Sabines, the Etruscans. Later, it clashed with the powerful Greek colonies of the south. Through skill in war and diplomacy, Rome emerged victorious. By 264 BCE, Rome controlled the Italian peninsula. But greater challenges awaited beyond the seas. The Punic Wars. Across the Mediterranean lay Carthage, a wealthy trading empire in North Africa. Its fleets ruled the waves, its merchants commanded great wealth, and its influence stretched from Spain to Sicily. Rome and Carthage became locked in a series of conflicts known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE over control of Sicily. Rome, though new to naval combat, built a fleet and learned quickly. After 20 years of struggle, Rome emerged victorious, seizing Sicily as its first province. But the Second Punic War would bring Rome to the brink of destruction. From Carthage arose one of history's greatest generals, Hannibal Barca. With boldness unmatched, Hannibal marched his army, including war elephants, across the Alps and into Italy. At Cannae in 216 BCE, he delivered one of the most devastating defeats in military history, encircling and annihilating a Roman army. For years, Hannibal roamed Italy, undefeated. Yet Rome, though battered, endured. It refused to surrender, raising new armies, striking Carthaginian holdings overseas. At last, in 202 BCE, Rome's general Scipio Africanus met Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in North Africa. There, Hannibal was defeated, and Carthage humbled. A third war followed decades later, in which Rome destroyed Carthage completely, its fields salted, its city reduced to ashes. The Mediterranean expansion and transformation. With victory came wealth, territory, and power. Rome conquered Macedonia and Greece, then spread into Asia Minor and the eastern Mediterranean. Ironically, though Rome had conquered Greece, it was Greek culture that conquered Rome. Roman generals brought back Greek art, sculpture, and literature. Roman youth studied the works of Plato and Aristotle, learned rhetoric from Greek teachers, and admired the tragedies of Sophocles and the comedies of Aristophanes. The Roman poet Horace would later write, "Greece, once conquered her fierce conqueror." In architecture, philosophy, and even religion, Greece left its indelible mark upon Rome. Greek gods, Roman names. The Romans adopted the Greek pantheon, giving new names to old gods. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Aphrodite became Venus. Athena became Minerva. Though the names changed, the myths lived on, woven into Roman identity. Temples rose in their honor, sacrifices were made, festivals celebrated. But Rome was practical. It did not merely borrow, it reshaped. Greek gods became Roman guardians of civic order and state power, reflecting the Roman emphasis on law and duty. Greek philosophy in Rome. Philosophy, too, crossed the seas. Stoicism, with its emphasis on self-control and virtue, appealed deeply to Roman leaders. The Stoic ideal of enduring hardship with dignity mirrored the Roman soldier's discipline. Epicureanism also spread, teaching that pleasure understood as tranquility and freedom from pain, was the highest good. Yet even Epicureans adapted their message to Rome's values, finding balance between the pursuit of peace and the demands of civic duty. In time, Roman thinkers like Cicero blended Greek philosophy with Roman practicality, laying foundations that would influence Europe for centuries. Rome's inner turmoil. But expansion brought problems. The influx of wealth widened the gap between rich and poor. Slaves captured in conquest flooded the economy, displacing small farmers. Senators grew wealthy from provincial exploitation, while ordinary citizens struggled. Tensions erupted in violence. Reformers like the Gracchus brothers sought to aid the poor, but were met with resistance and murder. Ambitious generals, commanding loyal armies, began to overshadow the authority of the Republic itself. Civil wars broke out, with figures like Marius, Sulla, and Pompey vying for power. And into this chaos stepped a man whose name would change history, Julius Caesar. Caesar and the fall of the Republic. Caesar, skilled in both politics and war, conquered Gaul, bringing vast riches and fame. His commentaries on the Gallic Wars not only recorded his victories but also showcased his genius as a leader. But the Senate, fearing his power, ordered him to disband his army. Instead, in 49 BCE, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, a bold act of defiance that plunged. Caesar was declared dictator for life. He enacted reforms, extended citizenship, and centralized authority. Yet many feared he sought kingship, betraying the Republic's ideals. In 44 BCE, he was assassinated on the Ides of March by senators who cried out, "For the Republic." But the Republic they sought to save was already dying. Augustus and the birth of empire. In the aftermath of Caesar's death, Rome again fell into civil war. Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's heir, battled for supremacy. At Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian triumphed. Soon after, he took the title Augustus, the revered one. Though he preserved the outward forms of the Republic, true power rested in his hands. Thus began the Roman Empire. Greece within Rome. Even as Rome rose to empire, the influence of Greece deepened. Roman authors like Virgil modeled their works on Homer, crafting epics that linked Rome's destiny to Troy. Roman architects built temples and theaters inspired by Greek designs, yet larger, more imposing, symbols of Roman grandeur. In art, in literature, in philosophy, Greece lived on through Rome. The two were intertwined, inseparable. Without Greece, Rome might have been a powerful state. But with Greece, Rome became the bridge between the ancient world and the modern. Reflection. Breathe slowly now, and imagine the city of Rome in its early days as a village on the Tiber, farmers and shepherds tending their flocks. Then, see it rise, stone by stone, road by road, until legions march across the world, carrying Roman law, Roman order, Roman might. And yet, behind it all, hear the echo of Greece. The voice of Homer in Virgil's verses. The wisdom of Aristotle in Roman classrooms. The strength of Stoic philosophy in the hearts of Roman leaders. Rome conquered Greece with its armies. But Greece conquered Rome with its ideas. Together, they created the foundation of Western civilization. Julius Caesar and the transformation of Rome. The Republic of Rome stood at a crossroads. Its armies had conquered the Mediterranean. Its wealth poured in from provinces across Europe, Africa, and Asia. But with triumph came turbulence. The balance of the Republic, the careful system of consuls, senates, and assemblies, strained beneath the weight of the empire. Amid this tension, one man rose to prominence. A soldier, a statesman, an orator, and a visionary. His name would echo through history, feared and admired in equal measure. Gaius Julius Caesar. The early years. Caesar was born in 100 BCE, into the ancient. He refused to submit, and though forced into hiding for a time, his defiance won him a reputation for courage. He traveled, studied rhetoric, and even endured capture by pirates in the Mediterranean. Legend says that when the pirates demanded ransom, Caesar laughed at the small sum and insisted they ask for more. During captivity, he joked, wrote, and promised them he would return to punish them. When released, he raised a fleet, hunted them down, and had them executed, showing the audacity that would mark his career. Caesar the politician. Returning to Rome, Caesar began his climb through the political ladder known as the cursus honorum. He served as military tribune, quaestor, aedile, and praetor. As an aedile, he staged lavish games and spectacles, winning the admiration of the people. He was charismatic, with a gift for words that stirred crowds. He spoke to common citizens as if he were one of them. He also gained the favor of powerful allies, such as Pompey the Great, Rome's leading general, and Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Together, they formed a political alliance later remembered as the First Triumvirate. Though unofficial, their partnership allowed them to dominate Roman politics. Caesar would receive command of Gaul, where his destiny awaited. The conquest of Gaul. In 58 BCE, Caesar set out as proconsul of Gaul, the land of modern France, Belgium, and beyond. There he waged one of the most remarkable campaigns in history. For nearly a decade, he battled tribes and forged alliances. He defeated the Helvetii, drove back Germanic incursions, and crossed the Rhine in daring displays of power. He even landed in Britain, the first Roman to do so, striking awe into distant lands. The culmination came against the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, who united tribes in rebellion. At the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, Caesar encircled the city with massive fortifications, both to keep the defenders in and to hold off reinforcements. It was a feat of engineering and determination. Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gaul became Roman. Caesar recorded these events in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, the Gallic War. Written in clear, commanding prose, it was part history, part propaganda, portraying Caesar as the savior of Rome. Through these writings, even those in distant lands came to know his name. The Rubicon. But success bred envy. Caesar's victories made him wealthy and beloved by his soldiers. The Senate, dominated by his rivals, grew fearful. Pompey, once his ally, turned against him. In 49 BCE, the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. To obey meant political ruin, perhaps even death. To resist meant civil war. At the banks of the Rubicon River, the boundary of his province, Caesar faced his choice. Legend says he paused, then declared, Alia iacta est. The die is cast. Rome trembled, for no general was permitted to bring troops into Italy. Civil war had begun. Civil war. Caesar moved swiftly, capturing cities and forcing Pompey to flee to Greece. At Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Caesar's forces met Pompey's larger army. Against the odds, Caesar triumphed. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was treacherously murdered. Caesar followed, entangled in Egyptian politics. There he encountered Cleopatra VII, the young queen of Egypt. Allies, lovers, and symbols of power, they forged a bond that fascinated the ancient world. Caesar restored Cleopatra to her throne and lingered in Egypt before returning to confront his enemies elsewhere. At Zela in Asia Minor, he won a swift victory, famously declaring, Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. By 46 BCE, Caesar was master of Rome. Dictator for life. The Senate granted him extraordinary powers. He reformed laws, revised the calendar, and reduced debts. He expanded the Senate, opened citizenship to many in the provinces, and planned vast public works. Yet with each reform, suspicion grew. Was Caesar restoring the Republic or destroying it? He wore the laurel wreath constantly, a subtle hint of kingship. He accepted honors, statues, and even a throne-like chair. When offered a crown by Mark Antony, he refused, but many wondered if the refusal was only for show. The title given to him in 44 BCE Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, confirmed the fears of many senators. Rome, they believed, was on the verge of monarchy. The Ides of March. A conspiracy formed. Led by Brutus and Cassius, men who had once been close to Caesar, they claimed to act in defense of liberty. On the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BCE, Caesar entered the Senate. As he took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him. Knives flashed. Caesar fell beneath their blows. According to legend, his last words were addressed to Brutus. Et tu, Brute. And you, too, my son. Whether he spoke them or not, his death sent shockwaves through Rome. Aftermath. The assassins believed they had saved the Republic. But instead, they unleashed further chaos. The people mourned Caesar. Mark Antony stirred the crowds with a fiery funeral oration. Civil war erupted once more, as Caesar's allies clashed with his murderers. From this turmoil emerged Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus. Through cunning and determination, Octavian outmaneuvered Antony and all rivals. He became Rome's first emperor, marking the true end of the Republic and the birth of the empire. Caesar's legacy. Caesar's impact was profound. He transformed Rome from a city-state. In memory, his presence endures. Close your eyes now and picture Caesar, standing at the banks of the Rubicon. The chill of the water, the weight of decision upon his shoulders. Behind him lay safety, ahead uncertainty and destiny. Hear the clash of swords at Pharsalus, the cries of soldiers in Gaul, the murmurs of senators in the chamber on the Ides of March. Rome was forever changed, caught between republic and empire, liberty and order, ambition and destiny. Julius Caesar was not merely a man. He was a turning point. Through him, Rome's story shifted, and the ancient world prepared to enter a new age. The Roman Empire at its height, Pax Romana. The death of Julius Caesar had plunged Rome into chaos, but from the storm emerged a new ruler, his adopted heir, Octavian, who would later take the name Augustus. With Augustus, the Roman world shifted once again, no longer a fragile republic teetering between rival generals, but now a vast empire under the authority of one man. The years that followed ushered in what many would remember as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. For nearly 2 centuries, from the reign of Augustus to that of Marcus Aurelius, the Mediterranean world experienced an age of relative stability, prosperity, and cultural flowering. It was not a peace without conflict, nor a harmony without shadows. But compared to the centuries of civil wars that had torn Rome apart, this was an age of security and order. Tonight, let us wander slowly through that world, through its cities, its monuments, its people, and its legacy. The rise of Augustus. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Rome was a fractured state. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal ally, claimed leadership. Brutus and Cassius, Caesar's killers, tried to rally the Senate. And Octavian, the young adopted son of Caesar, maneuvered carefully, using patience and calculation. The struggle ended with Octavian's triumph at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where his forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra of Egypt. Soon after, he consolidated power. Unlike Caesar, who had worn his ambition openly, Octavian cloaked his rule in tradition. In 27 BCE, the Senate granted him the title Augustus, meaning, revered one. He styled himself not as a king, but as the princeps, the first citizen, restoring the appearance of the old republic while in truth holding supreme power. He controlled the army, the treasury, the provinces, and the Senate itself. Rome was now an empire in all but name. A world at peace. Augustus' reign marked the beginning of the Pax Romana, a span of roughly 200 years in which Rome stood unchallenged in the Mediterranean. Borders were secured by legions stationed along the Rhine, the Danube, and the deserts of the east. Piracy, once rampant in the Mediterranean, was crushed, allowing merchants from Spain to Syria, from Egypt to Britain, goods flowed, wine, olive oil, grain, silk, spices, and gold. For the first time, a traveler could move across vast distances of the ancient world beneath the same system of law and order. The empire was immense, stretching 3 continents, home to perhaps 60 to 70 million people, nearly a quarter of the world's population at the time. The glory of Rome. Augustus once said, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." And indeed, he adorned the capital with temples, forums, theaters, and monuments. The Forum of Augustus stood as a symbol of order. The Era Pacis, the altar of peace, celebrated the stability brought by his reign. The aqueducts carried fresh water, while paved roads and bridges spread across the empire like veins in a living body. Later emperors expanded this vision. The Colosseum, begun under Vespasian and completed under Titus, could seat over 50,000 people, its grand arches echoing with the roar of crowds during games and spectacles. The Pantheon, rebuilt by Hadrian, with its vast dome and oculus, remains one of the greatest achievements of Roman engineering, a building so enduring that it still stands intact today. These monuments were not just stone and marble, they were statements. They told citizens and visitors alike that Rome was eternal, Rome was powerful, Rome was ordered amidst the chaos of the wider world. Life in the empire. But what of the people who lived within this empire of marble and stone? In Rome itself, the bustling capital, over 1 million inhabitants crowded into the city. Streets hummed with merchants, beggars, politicians, and entertainers. The poor lived in insulae, tall apartment blocks often cramped and prone to fire. The wealthy resided in spacious villas, decorated with mosaics and frescoes. Bread and entertainment panem et circenses were staples of urban life. The state distributed grain to the poor, ensuring loyalty, while the arenas hosted chariot races and gladiatorial games. Beyond Rome, life varied. In Egypt, the fertile Nile Valley fed much of the empire's grain supply. In Gaul, Roman roads and towns reshaped Celtic lands. In Britain, distant outposts guarded by Hadrian's wall kept watch over the northern tribes. And in the east, ancient cities like Antioch and Alexandria thrived, blending Greek, Roman, and local traditions. The empire was a tapestry of cultures. Latin spread in the west, Greek dominated the east, but local languages endured. Citizenship, once restricted, gradually expanded. To be Roman was not only to be Italian, but to share in the law and order of the empire. The emperors after Augustus. The emperors who followed Augustus varied, some wise, some cruel, some indifferent. Tiberius, his successor, was capable but reclusive. Caligula, remembered for eccentricity and cruelty, darkened the throne. Claudius, scholarly, and Nero, infamous for extravagance and tyranny, saw Rome burn and persecution rise. Yet the empire endured, strengthened less by individuals than by institutions. Legions stood loyal, governors administered provinces, roads and trade kept wealth flowing. The first century after Augustus is often remembered for its turbulence of rulers, but also for resilience. Rome could survive weak or corrupt emperors, because its structure was strong. The Golden Age, the 5 good emperors. By the 2nd century, Rome reached its zenith. The reigns of Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius are often called the age of the 5 good emperors. Nerva restored stability after the chaos of Domitian. Trajan expanded Rome to its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia and pushing into Mesopotamia. Hadrian consolidated, traveling tirelessly across the empire, fortifying borders, and commissioning architectural marvels. Antoninus Pius governed with fairness and peace, rarely waging war. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher-emperor, led during times of plague and invasion, penning his Meditations, a guide to wisdom rooted in Stoic thought. Under these rulers, the empire was prosperous and secure. The arts flourished, trade expanded, and law was codified in ways that influenced Europe for centuries. The idea of peace. The Pax Romana was not absolute peace. Rebellions flared in provinces. The legions clashed with Parthians in the east, and with Germanic tribes across the Rhine and Danube. Slavery remained widespread, and inequality persisted between rich and poor. Yet compared to the centuries before, this was an age of relative calm. For most ordinary people, life was predictable. They could till fields, trade goods, raise families, and worship their gods without constant fear of civil war. The peace was enforced by discipline and power, the legions guarding borders, the authority of Roman law, and the prestige of Roman culture. But to those living within it, it could feel like stability, like order, like safety. Cultural achievements. Roman literature, art, and philosophy thrived under the Pax Romana. The poet Virgil composed the Aeneid, Rome's great epic, linking the empire's destiny to the hero Aeneas. Ovid, with wit and playfulness, penned the Metamorphoses. Horace, Livy, Tacitus, and others gave voice to Rome's history and spirit. Architecture reached new heights: arches, domes, and concrete allowing structures never before imagined. Roman law evolved, systematized into principles that echo in modern legal codes. In science and medicine, figures like Galen and Pliny the Elder recorded knowledge that shaped centuries of thought. And in the midst of this cultural tapestry, new religions spread quietly, including a small, persecuted faith that would one day transform the empire: Christianity. The reliance on slavery and conquest meant cracks appeared when expansion slowed. Plagues, such as the Antonine Plague during Marcus Aurelius' reign, devastated populations. Beyond the frontiers, restless tribes pressed against Rome's borders, testing its strength. The Pax Romana, though remarkable, was fragile. It endured for centuries, but no peace lasts forever. Now, close your eyes and picture Rome at its height. The bustling streets of the capital. The glow of marble temples beneath the Mediterranean sun. Merchants sailing across calm seas, knowing Roman law and legionary power safeguard their journey. Children playing in villages from Spain to Syria, citizens beneath one empire, one law, one peace. The Pax Romana was more than a pause in war. It was the moment the Roman Empire became not just a conquering power, but a world unto itself. It was a time when people believed Rome would last forever, an eternal city at the center of an eternal peace. The spread of Christianity and the transformation of Rome. The Roman Empire, vast and glittering, seemed eternal during the Pax Romana. Its legions stood watch across continents, its emperors adorned the world with marble, and its laws bound millions of people under one order. And yet, in the quiet corners of this empire, a new faith began to stir, one so small, so fragile at first, that it went almost unnoticed. From a humble province in the eastern Mediterranean, in the hills of Judea, a movement began that would transform Rome more profoundly than any conquest, more deeply than any monument. It was the faith of Christianity, rooted in the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. At first, this faith was a whisper carried by fishermen, tradesmen, and travelers. But in time, it grew into a tide that reshaped the empire, altered its values, and defined its destiny. Tonight, let us walk slowly through this transformation. From the birth of Christianity in the shadow of Roman power, to its spread across the empire, to the moment it became the faith of emperors, and finally, to how it changed Rome itself. The world of Judea. To understand the spread of Christianity, we must begin in Judea, a province on the eastern edge of the Roman world. Judea was a land with a long, proud history, the home of the Jewish people. They had endured conquest after conquest: Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and now Roman. By the time Augustus ruled in Rome, Judea had been brought under imperial control, its rulers subject to the authority of governors and legions. Tension simmered. The Jews were deeply devoted to their faith, their God, and their traditions. But Roman taxation, Roman soldiers, and Roman governors made life uneasy. Many longed for liberation, for a Messiah who would restore the kingdom of Israel. It was in this world that Jesus appeared, teaching compassion, forgiveness, humility, and a kingdom not of this world, but of the Spirit. The reliance on slavery and conquest meant cracks appeared when expansion slowed. Plagues, such as the Antonine Plague during Marcus Aurelius' reign, devastated populations. Beyond the frontiers, restless tribes pressed against Rome's borders, testing its strength. The Pax Romana, though remarkable, was fragile. It endured for centuries, but no peace lasts forever. Now, close your eyes and picture Rome at its height. The bustling streets of the capital. The glow of marble temples beneath the Mediterranean sun. Merchants sailing across calm seas, knowing Roman law and legionary power safeguard their journey. Children playing in villages from Spain to Syria, citizens beneath one empire, one law, one peace. The Pax Romana was more than a pause in war. It was the moment the Roman Empire became not just a conquering power, but a world unto itself. It was a time when people believed Rome would last forever, an eternal city at the center of an eternal peace. The spread of Christianity and the transformation of Rome. The Roman Empire, vast and glittering, seemed eternal during the Pax Romana. Its legions stood watch across continents, its emperors adorned the world with marble, and its laws bound millions of people under one order. And yet, in the quiet corners of this empire, a new faith began to stir, one so small, so fragile at first, that it went almost unnoticed. From a humble province in the eastern Mediterranean, in the hills of Judea, a movement began that would transform Rome more profoundly than any conquest, more deeply than any monument. It was the faith of Christianity, rooted in the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. At first, this faith was a whisper carried by fishermen, tradesmen, and travelers. But in time, it grew into a tide that reshaped the empire, altered its values, and defined its destiny. Tonight, let us walk slowly through this transformation. From the birth of Christianity in the shadow of Roman power, to its spread across the empire, to the moment it became the faith of emperors, and finally, to how it changed Rome itself. The world of Judea. To understand the spread of Christianity, we must begin in Judea, a province on the eastern edge of the Roman world. Judea was a land with a long, proud history, the home of the Jewish people. They had endured conquest after conquest: Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and now Roman. By the time Augustus ruled in Rome, Judea had been brought under imperial control, its rulers subject to the authority of governors and legions. Tension simmered. The Jews were deeply devoted to their faith, their God, and their traditions. But Roman taxation, Roman soldiers, and Roman governors made life uneasy. Many longed for liberation, for a Messiah who would restore the kingdom of Israel. It was in this world that Jesus appeared, teaching compassion. Later emperors, such as Decius and Diocletian, issued edicts demanding sacrifices to Roman gods, punishing those who refused. Yet persecution often strengthened the faith. Martyrs, who died rather than deny their beliefs, became examples of courage and devotion. Stories of their sacrifice inspired others, and the faith endured. Christianity and Roman society. As decades turned into centuries, Christianity seeped deeper into Roman life. It appealed especially to the poor and enslaved, who found dignity in its message that all souls were equal before God. It also attracted women, who played active roles in early communities as leaders, patrons, and teachers. Even some members of the Roman elite, moved by the moral vision of the faith, converted quietly. By the 3rd century, Christianity was no longer a hidden sect but a widespread movement, present in cities across the empire. Churches were forming, bishops were guiding congregations, and letters circulated to unify doctrine. The empire that once tried to crush the faith now found it growing inside its very heart. The turning point, Constantine. The great turning point came in the early 4th century, with the reign of Constantine the Great. In 312 CE, Constantine faced a battle for control of the empire at the Milvian Bridge, near Rome. According to tradition, he saw a vision in the sky of a cross of light with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He ordered his soldiers to mark their shields with the Christian symbol, and he emerged victorious. The following year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting Christians freedom of worship throughout the empire. Persecutions ended. Churches were built openly. Bishops gathered to debate doctrine in councils supported by imperial power. Constantine himself converted to Christianity, becoming the first Christian emperor of Rome. Christianity becomes the state religion. In the decades that followed, Christianity moved from tolerated to dominant. Emperors favored the faith, giving it privileges and patronage. Pagan temples declined, some converted into churches. In 380 CE, under Emperor Theodosius, Christianity was declared the official state religion of the Roman Empire. The transformation was complete. The empire that once crucified Jesus now bowed before the cross. The transformation of Rome. The spread of Christianity did more than alter religion, it transformed Rome itself. The old gods of Jupiter, Mars, and Venus faded into memory. The Colosseum Games, once central to Roman life, began to decline as Christian values disapproved of such bloodshed. Laws shifted, influenced by Christian ethics from charity toward the poor to protection of widows and orphans. Art changed too. Where once statues of emperors and gods adorned temples, now churches rose with mosaics of saints and scriptures. Basilicas replaced forums as centers of gathering. Even the calendar transformed, centered now around Christian feasts and holy days. Rome was still Rome, its roads, its laws, its institutions endured, but its heart was no longer the same. The empire's spirit had been reshaped. A new identity. For centuries, Rome had prided itself on its power, its legions, its marble, and its conquest. Now, it carries a different legacy. The Eternal City was no longer just the center of the empire, it was becoming the center of Christendom. Bishops of Rome, later called popes, began to rise in authority. The faith that began in Judea now stretched to the farthest provinces, carried by the empire's own infrastructure. Rome had conquered the world. But in the end, a new faith conquered Rome. Close your eyes now and imagine. The streets of ancient Rome, once lined with temples to Jupiter and Venus, now echo with the chants of Christian hymns. The Colosseum, once filled with gladiators, now stands silent, its arches touched by time. In quiet basilicas, candles flicker before mosaics of saints. Pilgrims walk roads once traveled by legions, seeking holy shrines rather than battlefields. The transformation was immense from the empire of Augustus, built on conquest and marble, to the empire of Constantine, guided by the cross. Christianity, once a whisper in the hills of Judea, had become the voice of Rome itself. And in this transformation, the Roman world was forever changed. The crisis of the 3rd century and the division of the empire. The Roman Empire, once a symbol of stability and grandeur, began to tremble in the 3rd century. After the golden glow of the Pax Romana, after the rise of emperors who carried the empire to its heights, a long shadow fell across Rome. The world that had seemed unshakable was now uncertain. Borders weakened. Armies turned against their own leaders. Emperors rose and fell with terrifying speed. And for nearly 50 years, the empire staggered through a storm of invasions, rebellions, and chaos. This time became known as the crisis of the 3rd century. It was an age when Rome almost collapsed under the weight of its own greatness. But it was also a time of resilience, when out of disaster came adaptation and eventually, a transformation that would divide the empire forever. Let us walk slowly through this turbulent chapter, the crumbling of stability, the endless parade of emperors, the enemies at Rome's gates, the economy in freefall, and finally, the reforms that reshaped the empire into East and West. A shifting world. At the beginning of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire stretched wider than ever. From the sands of the Sahara to the rivers of Germany, from the Atlantic coasts of Spain to the rich valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates, Rome reigned supreme. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form. The empire was too vast for easy control. Communication across its roads and provinces was slow. A decision made in Rome might take weeks or months to reach governors. Rome's borders were long and vulnerable, pressing against restless peoples, Germanic tribes to the north, Persians to the east, desert raiders to the south. The economy strained under the weight of military spending. Armies were expensive to maintain, and emperors often promised soldiers higher pay to secure their loyalty. These cracks widened quickly when one man fell, Emperor Severus Alexander, assassinated in 235 CE by his own troops. His death opened the door to chaos. The age of the soldier emperors. From 235 CE onward, Rome entered a period of turmoil unlike any it had faced before. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors rose and fell, many through violence. Few reigned long enough to leave a mark, most died by assassination or defeat in battle. These rulers are often called the soldier emperors, men elevated by the legions in the field, chosen for their strength or their promises, then quickly discarded when fortunes shifted. In Gaul, legions proclaimed their generals as emperors. In the East, armies did the same. Rome itself was powerless to control the constant changes. It was as though the empire had no center anymore. Each army sought its own champion. Each general hoped to seize power. The unity of the empire, the dream of Augustus, seemed to unravel. Enemies on every side. As Rome turned inward, its enemies pressed harder from without. Germanic tribes, such as the Goths and Alemanni, crossed the Rhine and Danube, raiding deep into Roman lands. In the east, a new power rose, the Sassanid Persian Empire, strong and aggressive. Under King Shapur I, the Persians invaded Roman territory, even capturing the Emperor Valerian in battle, a humiliation Rome had never suffered before. In North Africa and the Middle East, revolts threatened stability. In Egypt, essential for its grain, unrest endangered the empire's food supply. For the first time in centuries, it seemed possible that Rome could truly fall. Economic breakdown. The crises of war fed into crises of money. Emperors, desperate to pay their armies, minted more and more coins but with less silver in each. Over time, Roman currency lost value. Inflation soared. Prices rose wildly. Trade declined as insecurity grew. Farmers abandoned lands devastated by raids. Cities, once thriving, shrank as people fled to the countryside for safety. The empire that had prided itself on prosperity now felt the pinch of scarcity and fear. The splintering of the empire. At the height of the crisis, Rome itself no longer commanded all, expanded rapidly, controlling much of the eastern provinces, Egypt, and even challenging Rome's authority directly. Rome, once a united colossus, was now fractured into three. Brief glimmers of recovery. Yet amid the chaos, a few emperors stood out as capable leaders. Gallienus, though plagued by invasions and rebellions, reformed the army by strengthening cavalry units and making them more mobile. His efforts gave Rome greater flexibility against swift-moving enemies. Aurelian, known as restorer of the world, reunited the empire between 270 and 275 CE. He defeated the Gallic Empire in the west and reclaimed the Palmyrene Empire in the east, bringing Rome back together at least for a time. He also built new defensive walls around Rome itself, a sobering sign that even the capital was no longer safe. These efforts showed that Rome still had resilience, but they could not erase the deeper problems. Diocletian and the Great Reforms. The true turning point came at the end of the 3rd century, with the rise of Diocletian. In 284 CE, Diocletian seized power and proved to be one of Rome's most effective reformers. He understood that the empire, in its old form, was too large for one man to govern. The crisis had shown that clearly. His solution was radical: he divided power. He established the Tetrarchy, ruled by 4. 2 senior emperors, called Augusti, would govern the east and west. Each would have a junior emperor, or Caesar, to assist and eventually succeed them. This system allowed faster response to threats across the empire's vast lands. It also provided a clearer line of succession, reducing the chaos of constant assassinations. Diocletian also reformed the economy, stabilizing the currency and imposing strict controls on prices. He reorganized provinces, strengthened borders, and expanded the bureaucracy to manage the empire more effectively. Though harsh at times, his measures gave Rome a new lease on life. The division of the empire. Diocletian's division of power marked a permanent transformation. The empire was no longer a single, tightly bound state centered only on Rome. Instead, it became a shared rule across regions. While Diocletian eventually retired, one of the few emperors to do so peacefully, his reforms paved the way for a lasting division. By the early 4th century, the empire would be formally split into eastern and western halves. The Western Roman Empire, centered on Rome, then later Ravenna. The Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Byzantium, later renamed Constantinople. This division was not yet final, but the path was clear. The unity of Augustus had given way to a new reality, a Rome of two halves, destined to walk different fates. Close your eyes for across the land. Merchants clutching coins that lose value by the day. Now imagine, too, the resilience. Cities building new walls. Generals fighting to hold the frontiers. Reformers working to stitch the empire back together. And finally, a wise emperor decided that one Rome was too fragile, that two Romes might endure. The crisis of the 3rd century nearly ended the Roman Empire. But in its survival, Rome was forever changed. It was no longer the singular, golden empire of Augustus. It was now a divided realm, a world of east and west, of shifting power and fragile stability. And in this division, the next chapters of history would unfold, leading eventually to the rise of Constantinople, the fall of Rome, and the transformation of Europe. Constantine, Constantinople, and the new Rome. The Roman Empire, battered and reshaped by the storms of the 3rd century, entered the 4th with uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. The division begun under Diocletian, the Tetrarchy, had brought order for a time, but ambition and rivalry among generals continued to unsettle the realm. It was in this fragile landscape that a single man emerged, a figure whose choices would echo not just through Roman history, but through the history of Europe, Christianity, and the world itself. That man was Constantine the Great. His rise marked more than just another emperor taking the throne. It marked the beginning of a new Rome, not in Italy, but far to the east, on the shores where Europe and Asia meet. Constantine would not only seize power, he would transform the empire's heart, its faith, and its identity. He would leave behind the Rome of marble senators and pagan temples and lead it into an era shaped by Christianity and a new capital, Constantinople, the new Rome. The road to power. Constantine was born around 272 CE, in Nisus, a town in the province of Mysia, today's Niš in Serbia. His father was Constantius Chlorus, a respected general who rose to become one of the emperors under Diocletian's tetrarchy. His mother, Helena, though of humble origins, would later be revered as Saint Helena, remembered for her deep Christian faith. When Diocletian retired in 305 CE, the carefully crafted balance of the tetrarchy began to unravel. Succession disputes and rivalries broke out. Constantine, already a skilled soldier and commander, found himself caught in this struggle for power. Over the next decade, he maneuvered carefully, building support among his troops, forging alliances, and waiting for the right moment. Taking this as divine guidance, Constantine ordered his soldiers to mark their shields with the Christian Chi symbol. The next day, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine's forces triumphed. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber, and Constantine entered Rome as victor. This moment marked a turning point. Constantine attributed his victory not to luck, nor to the old Roman gods, but to the Christian God. From that point on, Christianity, once persecuted, would be lifted to new heights. The Edict of Milan. In 313 CE, Constantine, alongside Licinius, who ruled the eastern half of the empire at the time, issued the Edict of Milan. This decree granted religious tolerance throughout the empire. Christians, who had long faced persecution, were now free to worship openly. Churches could be built. Property seized from Christians was returned. For the first time in its history, Rome embraced a principle of religious freedom. And Christianity, once a small, persecuted sect meeting in secret, began to grow into the dominant faith of the empire. Christianity and the emperor. Constantine's relationship with Christianity was complex. He did not immediately make it the sole religion of the empire, nor did he abolish pagan practices overnight. Temples to the old gods still stood. Pagan rituals continued. Yet Constantine actively supported the Christian faith. He granted bishops privileges, funded the construction of great churches, and involved himself in resolving disputes within the church. His mother, Helena, made a famous pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where she was said to have discovered the true cross of Christ. For Christians, Constantine was a hero, the emperor who ended centuries of suffering. For For the empire, his policies reshaped its identity forever. The Council of Nicaea. As Christianity spread, it also faced divisions within its own ranks. Debates raged over doctrine. About the nature of Christ, about the Trinity, about how to define belief. Constantine, ever the statesman, recognized that unity in faith was essential for unity in the empire. In 325 CE, he convened the Council of Nicaea, bringing together bishops from across the Christian world. The result was the Nicene Creed, a statement of faith that sought to resolve disputes and establish orthodoxy. It declared Christ as, of one substance with the Father, affirming his divinity and countering the teachings of Arius, who argued otherwise. This was the first ecumenical council in Christian history, and it set the stage for centuries of theological debate, but also for a unified church bound closely to imperial power. A new capital. Even as Constantine transformed religion, Danube and the East, where threats from Persians and Goths loomed. Rome was also burdened by its senatorial aristocracy, with traditions and rivalries that often hindered the emperor's authority. Constantine looked eastward. On the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, perched on the Bosporus Strait where Europe meets Asia, he saw a place of immense strategic value. It was ideally located for trade, defense, and governance. In 330 CE, he inaugurated this city as the new imperial capital. He named it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The splendor of Constantinople. Constantinople was more than a capital. It was a symbol of renewal, a statement that Rome itself was reborn. Constantine adorned the city with grand buildings, forums, palaces, and churches. He built a hippodrome for chariot racing, aqueducts for fresh water, and massive walls to protect it. Statues and treasures were brought from across the empire to give it an air of majesty. The city's location made it nearly impregnable. Surrounded by water on three sides and later fortified with the mighty Theodosian walls, Constantinople would endure long after Rome itself fell. Over time, it became not just the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, but one of the most influential cities in the world, a bridge between East and West, between Europe and Asia. Constantine's legacy. Constantine died in 337 CE, baptized on his deathbed as a Christian. His reign had lasted more than 3 decades, a rare stability in Rome's often turbulent history. His legacy was immense. He ended the persecution of Christians and elevated their faith to a central role in the empire. He established Constantinople, a capital that would stand for over 1,000 years. He reshaped the structure of imperial power, blending religion and governance in ways that would influence medieval Europe and beyond. Constantine was remembered as equal of the apostles by the Church and as one of Rome's greatest emperors by history. Yet his reign also set in motion new dynamics, the growing divide between East and West, the close intertwining of church and state, and the eventual dominance of Christianity over Rome's old religions. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world as Constantine left it. The old Rome, with its senators and pagan temples, still stood, but its center of gravity had shifted. Now, on the glittering Bosporus, a new Rome rose, one that looked eastward as much as westward. The Christian faith, once whispered in shadows, now rang openly in basilicas funded by the emperor himself. Bishops debated theology not in secret but under imperial guidance. And in the midst of this transformation, an empire that had nearly collapsed in the 3rd century found new strength, new direction, and a new identity. Constantine's reign was Danube and the East, where threats from Persians and Goths loomed. Rome was also burdened by its senatorial aristocracy, with traditions and rivalries that often hindered the emperor's authority. Constantine looked eastward. On the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, perched on the Bosporus Strait where Europe meets Asia, he saw a place of immense strategic value. It was ideally located for trade, defense, and governance. In 330 CE, he inaugurated this city as the new imperial capital. He named it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. The splendor of Constantinople. Constantinople was more than a capital. It was a symbol of renewal, a statement that Rome itself was reborn. Constantine adorned the city with grand buildings, forums, palaces, and churches. He built a hippodrome for chariot racing, aqueducts for fresh water, and massive walls to protect it. Statues and treasures were brought from across the empire to give it an air of majesty. The city's location made it nearly impregnable. Surrounded by water on three sides and later fortified with the mighty Theodosian walls, Constantinople would endure long after Rome itself fell. Over time, it became not just the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, but one of the most influential cities in the world, a bridge between East and West, between Europe and Asia. Constantine's legacy. Constantine died in 337 CE, baptized on his deathbed as a Christian. His reign had lasted more than 3 decades, a rare stability in Rome's often turbulent history. His legacy was immense. He ended the persecution of Christians and elevated their faith to a central role in the empire. He established Constantinople, a capital that would stand for over 1,000 years. He reshaped the structure of imperial power, blending religion and governance in ways that would influence medieval Europe and beyond. Constantine was remembered as equal of the apostles by the Church and as one of Rome's greatest emperors by history. Yet his reign also set in motion new dynamics, the growing divide between East and West, the close intertwining of church and state, and the eventual dominance of Christianity over Rome's old religions. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the world as Constantine left it. The old Rome, with its senators and pagan temples, still stood, but its center of gravity had shifted. Now, on the glittering Bosporus, a new Rome rose, one that looked eastward as much as westward. The Christian faith, once whispered in shadows, now rang openly in basilicas funded by the emperor himself. Bishops debated theology not in secret but under imperial guidance. And in the midst of this transformation, an empire that had nearly collapsed in the 3rd century found new strength, new direction, and a new identity. Allowed them in but treated them harshly, extorting food and exploiting their desperation. Resentment boiled over, and in 378 CE, the Goths rose in revolt. The Battle of Adrianople. The revolt culminated in the Battle of Adrianople, one of Rome's most catastrophic defeats. Emperor Valens, leading the Roman army, underestimated the Gothic strength. On the hot August day of the battle, the Goths annihilated the Roman legions. Valens himself was killed, his body never found. The defeat was more than just a lost battle. It revealed how vulnerable Rome had become. The legions, once invincible, could no longer guarantee security. After Adrianople, Rome increasingly relied on barbarian allies to fight barbarian foes, a dangerous cycle that undermined its independence. The sack of Rome, 410 CE. For centuries, Rome had stood untouchable. Even during Hannibal's invasion, the city itself had never fallen. It was the eternal city, the center of the world. But in 410 CE, shock spread across the empire, Rome was sacked. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, marched into the city after years of conflict with Rome's leaders. Though the sack was relatively restrained compared to later atrocities, the symbolism was devastating. Saint Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, captured the horror, the city which had taken the whole world was itself taken. The sack of Rome was a psychological blow. If the eternal city could fall, what else was safe? Struggles in the West. The 5th century saw the Western Empire caught in a spiral of crises. Economically, it was weak. The fertile lands of Egypt and the wealthy cities of the East were lost to the Western treasury when the empire split. Tax revenues dwindled. Trade routes were disrupted by invasions and piracy. Militarily, the West depended more and more on barbarian mercenaries who often held little loyalty to Rome itself. Generals rose and fell, many of them of barbarian descent, wielding power greater than the emperors they supposedly served. Politically, emperors became little more than puppets. The Senate lingered, but real authority lay in the hands of military strongmen or in Constantinople's distant influence. Attila the Hun, the scourge of God. In the mid-5th century, the West faced perhaps its most terrifying enemy, Attila the Hun. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila led massive armies across Europe, plundering, burning, and threatening both East and West. In 451 CE, he invaded Gaul, modern France. There, at the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, a coalition of Romans and Visigoths fought to stop him. The battle was brutal, one of the bloodiest of the ancient world, but Attila was halted. Yet the mere fact that Rome had to rely on former enemies like the Visigoths to save itself revealed Christian tradition, though the reasons may also have included famine, plague, and overstretched supply lines. The Vandals and the Second Sack of Rome. In 455 CE, disaster struck again. The Vandals, another Germanic tribe, sailed across the Mediterranean from their kingdom in North Africa. They entered Rome and plundered it for 2 weeks. Unlike Alaric's sack, this one was thorough. Treasures, statues, and wealth were stripped from the city. From this event, the word vandalism would one day be born, a symbol of senseless destruction. For Romans, it was another sign that their empire was slipping away. The last emperors. By the late 5th century, the Western Empire had become a shadow of its former self. Its emperors were often children or figureheads, controlled by barbarian generals who wielded real power. One of the most infamous of these generals was Odoacer, a Germanic leader who served in the Roman army. In 476 CE, Odoacer deposed the young emperor Romulus Augustulus. The name itself was symbolic of Romulus, like the legendary founder of Rome, Augustulus, a diminutive of Augustus, the first emperor. The first emperor had once been Augustus, the last was a little Augustus, a child who could not save the empire. Odoacer did not claim the imperial title for himself. Instead, he sent the imperial regalia to Constantinople, acknowledging the Eastern emperor as the sole ruler. With that act, the Western Roman Empire was no more. The survival of the East. While the West crumbled, the Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, endured. From Constantinople, emperors continued to rule for another 1,000 years. The East was wealthier, more stable, and more defensible. Its walls held against invasion, its trade routes remained active, and its administration was more effective. The fall of the West, then, was not the end of Rome entirely, but a transformation. The Eternal City itself declined, but Rome's legacy lived on in Constantinople, in the Church, and in the memory of its laws and culture. Why did Rome fall? Historians have debated for centuries the reasons behind Rome's fall. Some point to external pressures, invasions, the Huns, the Goths, the Vandals. Others point to internal decay, economic troubles, political corruption, reliance on mercenaries. Perhaps it was not one cause, but many, converging like threads of fate. Rome had simply grown too vast, too complex, too burdened by its own weight. The empire that once united the Mediterranean world could no longer hold itself together. And so it splintered, some pieces vanishing, others evolving into the medieval kingdoms that would one day shape Europe anew. Close your eyes now and picture the fall of Rome. The marble columns of the Forum stand cracked and overgrown. The once bustling streets are quiet. The distance, the sound of foreign soldiers speaking languages once unknown in the city, echoes through the ruins. And yet, amid this fall, something endures. Roman law, Roman roads, Roman language, Roman faith. The empire may have crumbled in the West, but its spirit lived on, carried into the Middle Ages and beyond. The fall of Rome was not just an ending. It was a transformation, a passing of the torch from the ancient world to the medieval, from empire to kingdoms, from pagan gods to Christian faith. The Western Empire was gone. But Rome's story was far from over. The rise of Byzantium and Justinian's dream of restoration. The Western Roman Empire had collapsed, but the story of Rome did not end with the fall of Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE. Far to the east, across the sparkling waters of the Bosporus, the empire lived on. This eastern half, centered on the magnificent city of Constantinople, would carry the Roman flame for another 1,000 years. Here, emperors ruled, armies marched, and great ambitions stirred. It was not the Rome of Augustus or Trajan, but it was still Rome, a Rome reborn in the East, a Rome that would come to be known as the Byzantine Empire. And in the 6th century, under the rule of one extraordinary emperor, Byzantium reached new heights of glory and power. His name was Justinian I. His reign marked both a dazzling revival of Roman greatness and the seeds of new challenges that would shape medieval Europe. This chapter is the tale of Constantinople's rise and Justinian's dream of restoring the empire. Constantinople, the new Rome. Let us begin with the city itself. Constantinople was founded by Constantine the Great in 330 CE as a New Rome. Its location was genius, perched on a peninsula between Europe and Asia, commanding the trade routes of land and sea. To the north lay the Black Sea, to the south the Aegean, to the west the Balkans, and to the east the riches of Asia. The city was ringed by strong walls, the most famous being the massive Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century. These triple layers of stone and towers made Constantinople nearly impregnable. For centuries, enemies would batter against them, only to be repelled. Within those walls, Constantinople was a jewel. Its great avenues were lined with markets and forums. Its palaces gleamed with mosaics. And at its heart stood the Hippodrome, the grand arena where tens of thousands gathered to cheer their favorite charioteers in races that stirred passions deeper than politics. Constantinople was not merely a city. It was a statement: Rome had not died. It had moved. The Byzantine identity. The people of this duality of Roman tradition mixed with Greek culture and Christian faith defined Byzantium. It was a fusion of the ancient and the medieval, the classical and the spiritual. And at the center of this world stood the emperor, a figure seen not merely as ruler, but as God's chosen on earth. Justinian's rise. In the year 527 CE, a new emperor came to the throne, Justinian I. Justinian was born far from the wealth and splendor of Constantinople. He came from a humble family in the Balkans. His uncle, Justin I, rose through the ranks of the army to become emperor, and Justinian, educated and ambitious, became his heir. From the moment he assumed the purple, Justinian dreamed of greatness. He believed it was his divine mission to restore the Roman Empire to its former glory. To him, Rome's loss of the West was not permanent. It could and should be reversed. But Justinian was not only a man of war. He was also a man of vision. He sought to reform the law, beautify his city, and strengthen the power of the church. Beside him stood one of the most remarkable women in history, his wife, Theodora. Theodora, from stage to throne. Theodora's story is as extraordinary as Justinian's. She had been born into poverty and worked as an actress, a profession often scorned in Byzantine society. Yet her intelligence, wit, and determination caught Justinian's eye. Against all conventions, he married her, and she became empress. Theodora was no mere consort. She was Justinian's partner in power, advising him in council, guiding him in crises, and standing firm in moments when even he faltered. In a world where emperors often bent to pressure, Theodora was unyielding. During the darkest hour of Justinian's reign, her courage would help save both the throne and the empire itself. The Nika riots, fire and fury in the Hippodrome. That darkest hour came in 532 CE. The people of Constantinople were divided into factions that supported rival chariot teams in the Hippodrome, the Blues and the Greens. These factions were more than just sports fans, they were political and social forces, capable of challenging imperial authority. In January of 532, anger over high taxes and political grievances erupted. The Blues and Greens, normally at odds, united in fury against Justinian. The city descended into chaos. Fires spread, buildings burned, and cries of Nika. Nika, meaning conquer, or victory, echoed through the streets. The rioters demanded Justinian's removal. Many of his advisors urged him to flee the city. For a moment, even the emperor wavered. But Theodora would not. In a famous speech, she declared, "Royalty is a fine burial shroud." She told Justinian that it was better to die a ruler than